For 50 years, Harrison Ford has been the ultimate professional. He never fakes a smile, and he never complains. But one co-star pushed him to the absolute breaking point, Brad Pitt. In 1997, they filmed The Devil's Own with a $90 million budget. It should have been a masterpiece. Instead, it was a crime scene of egos. Ford recently admitted, "It was the hardest film I ever made." Why did the legend hate the heartthrob? It wasn't just a personality clash. It was a war of values. Today, we reveal the brutal truth about the feud that shook Hollywood, the $90 million mistake. To understand why these two giants clashed so violently, you have to look at the battlefield before the first shot was fired. The year was 1996. The dynamics of Hollywood were very different. It was the era of the megastar, where a single name on a poster could open a movie to $100 million. Harrison Ford was 54. He was the established king. He famously worked as a carpenter before he was an actor, and he never lost that blue-collar mindset. To Ford, a movie is like a house. You need a blueprint, and you build it brick by brick. You don't improvise the foundation. He viewed acting as a service to the audience, not a therapy session for the artist. Brad Pitt was 32. He was the new golden boy, the sexiest man alive. He represented a new style of acting, looser, emotional, method-based, and riding a wave of Gen X rebellion. He was looking for art. Ford was looking for structure. When The Devil's Own was pitched, it seemed perfect. But there was one fatal problem. There was no script, or rather, there wasn't one script. There were two versions of the truth. Brad Pitt had signed on to a dark, gritty drama where his character, IRA terrorist Roy Devaney, was the tragic hero. Harrison Ford had signed on to a complex thriller where his character, Sergeant Tom O'Mara, was the moral center and the hero. They were literally starring in two different movies. The studio, Sony Pictures, was terrified. They had already committed a massive budget. They needed both names on the poster to make the math work. So they made a fatal mistake. They tried to please everyone. They let Brad Pitt approve a script that favored him. Then they let Harrison Ford approve a different script that favored him. When the two stars finally met to read the dialogue, the realization hit them like a cold bucket of water. They had been sold two different lies. For Harrison Ford, this was unacceptable. He looked at the initial draft and saw a problem. His character looked like a fool. "I didn't want to play a guy who was just duped for 2 hours," Ford later explained in a moment of frustration. "I wanted complication. I didn't just want to be the good cop fighting the bad guy. I wanted the burden. I wanted to know the truth." He refused to play a passive character who just reacts to Brad Pitt's edginess. He refused to let the kid walk away with the movie. So Ford exercised his power. He brought in his own writers to rewrite the scenes. Pitt, furious that his dark indie drama was being turned into a Harrison Ford action blockbuster, retaliated. He brought in his own writers. It became a revolving door of screenwriters. 7 different writers tried to fix the mess. They were rewriting scenes on napkins during lunch. They were rewriting dialogue in trailers an hour before shooting. For a man like Ford, who values preparation above all else, this chaos was insulting. He wasn't there to babysit a young star's ego. He was there to do a job, and the tools were broken. But Brad Pitt wasn't backing down. He felt tricked. He famously tried to quit the movie a week before shooting started. He called the studio head and said, "I'm out. I can't do this." The studio's response was cold and corporate. "Fine, but if you walk, we will sue you for $63 million. Pitt was forced to stay. And a man forced to work is a dangerous man to be around. He showed up, but he brought a cloud of resentment with him that would hover over the set for months. The Cold War on set. Once the cameras rolled, the set turned into a freezer. Crew members reported that the tension between Ford and Pitt was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. They didn't scream. They didn't throw chairs. That would have been easier. A shouting match clears the air. Instead, they engaged in a brutal, icy silence. They wouldn't look at each other between takes. They wouldn't eat lunch together. When the director yelled, "Cut," They would retreat to their separate trailers like boxers go to their corners. Director Alan J. Pakula, a Hollywood legend who directed All the President's Men and Sophie's Choice, was reduced to a glorified babysitter. It is tragic to think about. A great director, a man of immense talent, spending his days running between Ford's trailer and Pitt's trailer, negotiating like a diplomat in a war zone, just to get them to agree on a line of dialogue. Sadly, this would be the final film Pakula ever directed before his tragic death in a car accident in 1998. He spent his final creative energy managing a feud. The core issue was always the character arc. Brad Pitt felt that Harrison Ford was trying to steal the movie. He felt that Ford, using his leverage as a bigger star, was bullying production to make himself look better while reducing Pitt to a simple, one-dimensional villain. And from Pitt's perspective, he wasn't entirely wrong. Ford was exercising his power. But from Ford's perspective, he was saving the film. Ford knew audiences. He knew people wouldn't pay to see Harrison Ford play a dummy who gets tricked by a terrorist in his own house. He was protecting the investment. He was ensuring the story made sense. They were literally shooting scenes where the actors were reading from different versions of the script. Ford would say a line from his rewrite. Pitt would cut the scene and say, "That's not what my script says." The crew watched in awkward silence, afraid to make eye contact. It was a nightmare of ego. But here is the difference. Ford was fighting for the film. Pitt was fighting for his vibe. To the old-school crew members, Ford was a professional trying to salvage a mess. Pitt was the whining kid who didn't know how the business worked. There were other frictions. Pitt showed up with a scruffy beard and messy hair, embracing the grunge aesthetic. Ford, always clean-cut and sharp, reportedly hated it. He felt it was disrespectful to character, and the uniformed IT was a clash of generations. The greatest generation values of duty and discipline versus a Gen X rebellion of feeling and mood. Ironically, this toxic chemistry worked on screen. When you watch the movie, especially the final showdown on the boat, the hatred in their eyes feels real. Because it was. They weren't acting. They were just tired of each other. The public betrayal. If the filming was hell, the press tour was a public execution. Usually actors fake it. It is part of the contract. They smile on the red carpet. They hug at the premiere, and they tell Jimmy Leno funny stories about pranks on set. But Ford and Pitt couldn't even pretend. The resentment ran too deep. During promotional interviews in 1997, Brad Pitt went rogue. In an interview with Newsweek, he dropped a bomb that stunned the industry. He called the movie the most irresponsible bit of filmmaking, if you can even call it that I've ever seen. He didn't stop there. He called the production a disaster. He detailed the lack of a script. He practically told the audience, "Don't watch this." He threw the studio, the director, and implicitly Harrison Ford under the bus. Harrison Ford was furious. Ford is a company man. He believes in the code. If you take the check, you sell the movie. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, and you certainly don't insult your colleagues in a national magazine. To Ford, Pitt's comments were the ultimate sign of unprofessionalism. It was a tantrum. It was a betrayal of the hundreds of crew members who work hard to make the film happen. When asked about Pitt's comments, Ford's response was icy and precise. "I think it's unfortunate that he expressed his feelings that way," Ford said in his signature grumble, his finger pointing in frustration. "It's not how I would have handled it." He didn't yell. He just pointed out the lack of class. The movie eventually opened and made money, $140 million, proving Ford's instincts right. But the relationship was dead. For the next 20 years, the two men barely spoke. They moved in different circles. Ford stayed on his ranch in Wyoming, flying planes, rescuing stranded hikers with his helicopter, and living a private life with Callista Flockhart. Pitt became the center of the Hollywood circus, with high-profile marriages to Jennifer Aniston and Angelina Jolie. Always surrounded by paparazzi, they represented two opposing poles of Hollywood: the Carpenter versus, the rock star, the adult versus, the cool kid. It seemed like a bridge that would never be rebuilt. The industry assumed they hated each other, and for a long time they were right. The peace treaty. But time has a funny way of softening even the hardest edges. Harrison Ford is now 83. Brad Pitt is 60. The young punk who annoyed Ford is now an industry veteran himself, with his own production company, his own Oscar, and his own scars from the brutal Hollywood machine. And recently, the silence was finally broken. In 2023, while promoting Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, Harrison Ford was asked about Brad Pitt again. The reporter expected the usual grumpy dismissal, but Ford surprised everyone. "I admire him," Ford said. "He's a wonderful actor. He's a really decent guy." It was a moment of grace from the old lion. He admitted, finally, that the friction wasn't just Pitt's fault. It was a shared failure. "We couldn't agree on a script," Ford said. "Each of us had different ideas. It was complicated, but I liked the movie very much." He even gave credit where it was due. He revealed that the character complexity he fought for, it was actually Brad Pitt who helped develop it in the early stages. Brad developed the script. It was his project first. Ford admitted it was an acknowledgement that perhaps 25 years ago, two great artists just got in each other's way. But let's be clear, they are not barbecue buddies. They don't hang out on weekends. Harrison Ford is still the grumpy uncle who prefers the company of his planes to the company of actors. But the feud reminds us of a time when movies mattered enough to fight over. It wasn't about green screens and CGI monsters. It wasn't about selling toys. It was about two alpha males locked in a room, fighting for the soul of a character. It was messy. It was toxic. But it was real. Harrison Ford survived the nightmare. He proved, once again, that he is immovable. He taught a young Brad Pitt a lesson in toughness that he never forgot. And at 83, Ford is still standing, still working, and still refusing to fake a smile for anyone. What do you think? Was Harrison Ford right to rewrite the script to save the movie? Or was Brad Pitt right to feel betrayed by the changes? Who won the acting battle in The Devil's Own? Let us know in the comments below. God bless you, Harrison, and thank you for keeping it real.